podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. Because every situation is unique, you should consult with a qualified legal professional for advice specific to your circumstances. If you need legal guidance, please reach out to an accredited attorney or contact us to schedule a consultation. Hello, and welcome back to the Veteran Benefits Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Deming. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that we've gotten a lot of questions on recently, which is the Take Care of America's Veterans Act, which is pushing its way through Congress right now and causing a lot of reaction from veteran service organizations, VSOs, and the online community. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about what's actually going on with that and hopefully dispel some fears and give you guys some actionable information that you guys can use when you're making decisions about your own claims and your own financial situations. So the Take Care of America's Veterans Act is a conglomerate of about 60 veteran-related bills that in some form or another have been pushing their way through Congress. So the main issue that I'm hearing a lot of concern about is part of that bill is the Take Care of America's Veterans Bill includes the Major Richard Starr Act bill, which has been getting a lot of bipartisan support and some offsets for that bill. And that's what's causing the major upset. So the Major Richard Starr Act, just if anyone's not following what that is, it would be a law that would allow people to receive their full amount of retired pay from Department of Defense, DFAS, as well as the full amount of their VA pay. Right now, if a veteran is rated 50% or less, if they're rated less than 50%, so 40% or less, then they are not entitled to receive the full amount of retirement pay and VA disability pay, and they have to choose which one they want, unless they qualify for combat-related special compensation. So the Major Richard Starr Act would allow veterans who retire to keep their full amount of retirement pay and also get their full amount of VA disability pay that they're entitled to on top of that without any offsets. So that bill has gotten major bipartisan support. It's pushing its way through. It looks like better than a 50% chance that it will eventually pass in some form or other, possibly with some modifications. But with that, there is a cost because now veterans who had an offset from their retired pay would receive both. And so there is a cost. And so one of the things that's been getting a lot of pushback is the proposal to basically reduce compensation for sleep apnea claims and tinnitus claims would be used as an offset to pay for retired veterans to receive both their retired pay and disability pay. And it's kind of interesting because that proposed legislation had already gone through and was waiting to be implemented anyway, and there wasn't that much pushback on it. I think there were some people that were pretty upset about it, but it wasn't receiving this major social media push or major interest from the VSOs in a public way anyway, until those proposed reductions in sleep apnea and tinnitus were used as an offset for the Major Richard Starr Act. And that just left a sour taste in everybody's mouths because it's basically taking benefits away from one subset of veterans in order to fund benefits for another subset of veterans. And it's getting pushback from VFW, from American Legion, definitely from the online veteran community. So there's a few things to kind of untangle with that. First of all, it seems unlikely that bill is going to pass in its current form. Congress doesn't want to, neither side of the aisle wants to be seen as pushing forward bills that are reducing benefits for veterans. That's just not politically tenable. And so with the amount of pushback that it's getting, I don't see it going through. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict what politicians are going to do and how they might leverage one bill for another bill. We don't see it going through, though, at least not in its current form. If it does go through and VA reduces ratings for sleep apnea and reduces or eliminates ratings for tinnitus, we're getting a lot of questions from people who already have rating for those conditions on whether VA is going to automatically reduce them or sever their benefits for those conditions. Because if you've been counting on your disability pay and suddenly VA comes in and reassesses it, that could be a major upset. So the good news is that as of right now, from all the congressional testimony and all of the stuff that we're reading, There does not seem to be any push, and there's no language in the current version of the bill that would allow VA to go back and retroactively reduce or eliminate ratings for people who already are rated for sleep apnea and tinnitus. It would mostly apply to people who are prospectively applying for those conditions and potentially people who are subject to reevaluation. And the main people who would be subject to reevaluation would be people who subject themselves to reevaluation. So if you are rated 30% for sleep apnea and you put in an increase to try to get that 50% for sleep apnea, and VA says, okay, well, now we're going to rate you, we're going to use the new code. And so they could potentially reduce you down to 0. This is a little bit scary because in prior regulations, people were grandfathered in. If you already had a rating, that was a protected rating. And so that the fact that they even have language about people being reevaluated could trigger a reduction or a severance in benefits is a little bit unsettling. But the main takeaway from that is if this passes, so pay attention, but if this new proposed bill passes either in the Take Care of America's Veterans bill and the bigger bill that includes this offset for reducing sleep apnea and tinnitus, or if it passes as a separate standalone bill, you want to be very cautious about filing for increased ratings or reopening things that VA has already granted. Because if you reopen something VA has already granted, they can go back, they can apply the new regulations, and they're also using their AI systems to detect fraud, which I think I did another episode on that one, and we will be talking about that more going forward. We definitely talked about the use of VA's use of AI, but basically they're not going back to retroactively look for signs of fraud in claims that have already been granted. But if you reopen it, their AI could trigger things. And we don't have enough data points yet to know how reliable their fraud detection algorithms are. So it's a good rule of thumb to not reopen things if there's law changes, or now with the AI system scanning files. And it's not that you necessarily committed fraud, but if you got a nexus letter from a company that VA has on their fraud list, or if they look back and see that your lay statements weren't signed, or you uploaded unsigned version of your lay statements, or if there's other things in your file that just weren't kind of buttoned up as nicely as VA might want to see it, they could potentially flag those and then do a review. Now, if they do propose a reduction or a severance, they have to issue a letter proposing that, and you have a period of time to dispute the proposed reduction or proposed severance. You have 30 days to request a hearing, and you have 60 days typically to send in notice of your disagreement or dispute of their proposal to sever or reduce a rating. So if you do get one of those notices, understand that you have time to fight it. If you put in a request for a hearing, VA has to schedule those. They're so backlogged that a lot of times we're seeing those requests for hearings sit for a year or more before something gets scheduled. So that can be a tool to use while you're potentially looking for representation or deciding whether and how to dispute any proposed reductions or severances. Dialing it back, again, we don't see this large bill going through in its current form. There's just way too much pushback. And we are hoping that the Major Richard Starr Act gets passed in its current form, but probably not as part of the Take Care of America's Veterans Act, because that offset is really, at least not without some modifications to it. So the things that you can do, I would caution there's a difference between staying informed and allowing online forums to trigger panic. So stay informed, read the proposed acts and the proposed bills, follow congressional testimony if that's something you're interested in. You can also look at your VFW, American Legion legislative pages. They often have information about what bills they support, what bills they oppose, what lobbying efforts they're doing. You can get involved. Most of the VSOs have a relatively cheap dues. And so if that's something you're interested in doing, they have a larger voice than individual veterans because they're organized. And so getting involved in a VFW or American Legion chapter could be a helpful way to get your voice heard. You're always welcome to reach out to your congressional representatives. They have staffers that specialize in different areas of law and support for their constituents. And they always want to hear from veterans. And so if you have strong feelings about some of the bills as they're written, it's a good idea to reach out. You can give a phone call or write a letter or an email to your congressional representative or your senator and let them know your thoughts about how this would impact veterans and why you think it's unfair. Again, I think those efforts tend to have more weight when they're funneled through an organization. We here at ProVet Legal, we're members of National Organization for Veterans Advocates, NOVA, and it's a bunch of accredited attorneys, accredited claims agents, and the board has contracted with lobbyists. And so we're constantly looking at these kinds of issues as well. And our executive director will provide testimony on the Hill about these kinds of issues. So we're following it. It's not something that we are currently, I guess we're always concerned. We're always following stuff closely, but it's not something that the veteran advocate community is losing sleep over right now. So I hope that this episode kind of helps you process the information that's out there, understand a little bit more about what the Major Richard Starr Act is, what the Take Care of America's Veterans Act is, how they relate, and why those offsets are causing people to push back. Because if we're reducing benefits for people who have sleep apnea and people who have tinnitus in order to fund, not because that's the right thing to do or because the functional impairment's gotten better, but we're reducing them in order to fund the Major Richard Starr Act so that people who receive retirement pay and disability pay can receive both of them at the same time, then that's just not fair. That's not doing justice to our veterans. And that's the kind of thing that we stand up and fight against here at ProVet Legal. And it's the type of thing that we encourage our listeners and our clients to get involved in community advocacy efforts to make sure that these kinds of bills don't pass that are going to take benefits away from veterans. So I hope that answers some questions, alleviates some fears and some concerns. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments section to this episode. Please like and subscribe, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.